The Grand Marquis is back. It's gotten some bigger tires and bigger brakes since last time it was on the channel. John's been having fun with it or whatever, but you know, it came back because he just absolutely hates the 5-speed swap. We're gonna go back to an automatic. Just kidding. It's here to get a supercharger. Of course, we've got the supercharger and the kit itself for install. We're going to be adding a boost and an oil temp gauge. We've got the remapped SCT mass airflow sensor. We've got some bigger fuel injectors to put in. Different thermostat, a couple of different pulleys going to an OEM style balancer. We've got this little tube for adding in the blow-off valve. That's right here. And over here we've got an intercooler and just a generic kit of piping in order to make our intercooler setup. Ah yes, and the high flow fuel pump. So we've got quite a few things to add to the car in order to make it work right with the supporting mods. It's not just slapping the supercharger on and calling it a day. I mean, even after we put all these supporting mods on, it's going to need to be retuned. Oh, and we've got a Professional Products aluminum intake manifold to put on and replace the factory plastic one, just as a safety as far as putting some boost at it and not having the plastic manifold blow up. John brought this to me wanting to see about porting it, which, you know, taking a quick little glance, for sure it needs a little bit of touch-up work as far as making it a smooth entry. I already took the cover off the bottom here, and you can see just how bad some of the ports are as far as stuff lining up. I mean, there's even the gasket is hanging over the edge in places, but I mean, some of them are pretty close, but then I don't know, there's got to be an 1/8 inch ledge right there, and then that side's pretty close, but then one of these has got a big nasty overhang in it, not to mention just the transition into here. It sucks to see that this super tight radius is here, because the first thing I'd want to do is start grinding that back and put a nice big fat radius on those port entries. But we can't do that because of the way this casting is. It doesn't have any meat to the backside, so those are kind of stuck. I mean, I could try to just break that edge a little bit, but it's probably not even worth my time. So really, we're just looking at trying to make these ports just match it. And there's another big chunk of gasket hanging over the edge. And so yeah, we're just trying to make everything blend, smooth transition. It's about all you can really do with this intake manifold, because it just doesn't have meat where it needs to be able to actually spend a lot of time grinding and make a big improvement. I'm just choosing a long burr for this. This is a fine cut. Typically you'd use this for finishing work, and since we're not really taking a ton of material out, I just want to start with this so that as soon as we're like matched up, I'm not worried about surface finish. It didn't take too terribly long. Got all the transitions blended out. Few of the ports were real heavy hogging on one side or the other where I had to blend it out a little bit more. You know, specifically this one. Had to take quite a bit of material out so that it came up a little higher over the edge. But again, there isn't any material back here to really be grinding into, so I had to be super careful with that, not to end up taking too much out. Yeah, this is done. I don't see any reason to try to do anything more than this. If you're wondering why the whole thing's not shiny for being ported, well, that'd be just polishing, and it has zero performance gains, so it's really just a waste of my time and a waste of the customer's money to spend the time to do it. So we're just focusing on the stuff that's actually going to directly affect airflow, and that's been taken care of. We took out our casting line down in here. We had a really terrible mismatch in these areas. It's all blended out. You can see it's kind of a rough finish. Intake manifold side, doesn't matter. That's actually better than being too smooth. There's no reason for it to be a mirror polish. I'm not doing anything out here on the openings unless the customer gets back to me that the gaskets are a very close match to the cylinder heads. These are small, but it's better for you to have the intake manifold be small than to be bigger than the head, in which case the gasket mismatch isn't that big a deal, because as the air is flowing, we don't want it to crash into a ledge. So it can just have a little bit bigger space and then back into a larger port in the head. What we don't want to do is open this intake manifold up so that's crashing into a ledge trying to go into the head. Oh, yeah, that's the short and sweet of it for this intake. I really didn't know what to expect when this thing showed up. I can't say I'm really surprised. It's a lightweight casting, even though the manifold itself is quite hefty. Especially this plenum area is probably the biggest disappointment of the manifold. If I was designing, like I've already talked to the customer about it, like if it was just a matter of making more power, I'd just throw this thing in the trash and start from scratch, or at the very least, I'd end up taking it off, and then we'd have to get in here and weld up all of these corners so that we had material to grind into, which at which point the thing's going to flex all over the place and be all twisted. It's going to take machine to get it back flat. You know, at which point then we'll have to do our port matching again. However, depending on how much it all twists around, it might just be more work than making something from scratch anyway. And if I was going to make something from scratch, provided there's nothing in the way around this area, I'd probably have the runner entries be extended straight up just a little bit. I mean, they're only a half inch or so up in anyway, other than this curve adding length to the runner. But I just have them run straight up, make sure there's a nice big fat radius, and then I'd open this whole area up so that it had a nice large plenum area for air to get into and be slowed down and have plenty of time to get around all the cylinders. First thing I did was just get the car up in the air. Wanted to get the bumper off just to give myself some room. Plus there's just a pile of factory and aftermarket plastics that were on this car. That hose was the attempt at a cold air intake, I guess. So it already cut through that bracket there, which worked out because the nut was rusted off and just spinning. However, I mean, it happens to be in the right place for where the intercooler is going to sit and pass through. Right there. I'm going to have to cut the other side. I've kind of marked it out where I want to cut it. And basically, I want to maintain as much structural integrity as possible, and this plastic goes up higher for air deflection to make sure there's air going through the radiator and all that. So I want to maintain as much of this as possible, but we've got to get this out of the way because I know there's going to be a boost tube that comes through here and basically snake back and then go up on the other side of this reservoir or whatever that is. Otherwise, I've just taped off both sides of the car. This is just so when you're leaning on it for working on the engine, we can at least have a little bit of protection for the paint. That intercooler is going to have to sit right about here, so we should be able to make some tabs off of, oh no, that's plastic. So never mind, no, we can't mount to that. I'll still have to figure something else out there. It would be nice if we came up a little bit higher, but there's taper in this intercooler, so it won't fit between these little spots on both sides. But we are up high enough, because it was like the bottom of this panel was where all the flat was. So we are up high enough to make it work. I just need to play with it some more and figure out where exactly I want to mount it at. Now, I did start this intending to take the whole crash structure and nose off. However, the nose is tied in with the fender via some pins here on the side. So, via some pins up here on the side where there's a bolt. So you have to basically take the fenders off first, or at least get them loose enough to, pull away from the nose cone piece. And it was looking like it was going to be a lot more work. And I mean, really, with the bumper cover off, I've got enough room here to figure out what I'm going to do with the intercooler without having to take the rest of the front of the car apart. Plan is to go with a super simple bracket. After looking at it some more, I'm just going to have like some flat bar that comes up, gives enough clearance to the intercooler to be able to put a bolt in it from the intercooler side, and it'll just bend and go up to the top. I'll be able to pass that bolt through into these flat spots right here, and then on the upper part of this frame support across the front, I'll have to add some kind of a additional bracket onto there because the height is different, which you can see from the top. So like when we get that flat lined up, it's set farther to the back of the car. So we'll just need some kind of a little bit of an extra bracket to come off and either weld onto here, or if I can get the angle right, it might be able to drill down from the top and put bolts in right here. I would like it to be a completely removable thing just because. Now, one of the things that I know is going to have to happen is we need to do a fender mount coolant tank, so this has to come off. I also don't know if we can pull that harmonic balancer without taking at least the fans, if not the radiator and condenser also out. Hopefully I don't have to do anything with the condenser, but we're getting the coolant drained out of at least the radiator right now. We also got to change the intake manifold, so like we got to take the coolant out of the car one way or another. So that's draining right now, just kind of in preparation. I can start pulling some more of this stuff off. Again, it's nicer with the bumper cover off. I can get a little closer to everything. I don't have the material to make the intercooler mount right now though, so that'll have to wait a couple of days, but otherwise, I mean, I have a plan for it, so not too worried about that. I can just plug away on some other stuff in the meantime. So that bracket that was up here, and these two bolts are for the alternator. Obviously this one is super tight to the back of the water pump pulley. I was able to do it with an open end wrench, but this is like an extra thick one for a line wrench. If I'd have been using a regular thinner wrench, I think it would have rounded the bolt out. But because I was using this extra thick one, it deflected less and was able to just get it to crack loose. So try that if you're gonna do it that way. Otherwise, probably pull the pulley so you don't round that bolt off if you don't have this as an option. Got the intake pulled off now, but this is a perfect example of why I did not port match that Professional Products intake we're going to put on, because the ports are significantly smaller than what the gasket is. And you can see that repeated here. Now the reasoning for this is this little bit of a big area as it crosses between the intake manifold and the head isn't going to have much, if any, effect on the actual airflow. But if I'd opened this intake manifold up, it would have created a big ledge to the actual airflow passing between the two, because the intake would have been big, the head would have been small, and it would have had a ledge to crash into. Instead, when it's just the gasket thickness, it can kind of skip right over that and keep flowing. So unless you are able to properly port match an intake manifold to the opening that is on the cylinder head, you don't want a gasket match. And the only gasket match being just opening it up to match the gasket, because on most engines, even just because you've opened it up to the gasket doesn't mean the alignment's going to be great either. They can be offset, or in a older style V8, they can have different heights on that V where it moves things around. So you have to really align the gasket to the cylinder head and then port the cylinder head to a gasket size in order to then have it located on the cylinder head, and then match that up with the intake to make sure you're transferring it into an exact position. I've got another video on that with an older typical style V8. In this case here, the heads aren't ported. We're not going to port match the intake. It's just not worth it. If anything, we want the intake to be slightly small of the head so that it doesn't have any ledge to crash into, and it'll have nice smooth airflow into a larger area. Well, that's probably going to be an issue. So this Speedmaster intake has thinner flanges than the plastic one. Had some bolts laying around to use. Interesting enough, it's M8 by 125, and since I needed a shorter length, they just happen to be the right length. Is the bolts from the Tremec 3650. So like when we did the 5-speed swap in this car, same bolts in that transmission, as I have some extras laying around that happen to be the right length for the intake. So as you can see there, they're just a little bit shorter, and they don't have the nose on them, but they've got the flange head, which is super nice. So yeah, they're maybe, I don't know, half an inch shorter. And like I said, when we ran this one down, it bottomed out and there was just enough to still spin the washer. So I know this is still going to have plenty of thread while not bottoming out in the hole. Got the intake bolted back down. The water neck bolts are still the correct length and can be reused. We put a new thermostat in just because we're here. Obviously change out the O-ring with that. This intake manifold is kind of a 3-piece deal, and because we're being boosted with it, apparently the recommendation is to ditch the paper style gaskets that come with it and go to just using gasket maker. I use some of the black right stuff. Did that last week. It's set up plenty good. I still will use the regular gasket for under the throttle body, because if that ever blows out, it's something that's much easier to change than tearing all of this back apart to get between the three pieces of the intake manifold. So at this point, we're just reassembling some stuff before we get into the supercharger. I gotta put the coils back in. One of them was damaged. We'll be getting a new one of those, so I'll probably leave out, say, number 1, just to make it super easy to pop that one in afterwards, especially because I can put the other ones in, get the new fuel injector stuck in, the fuel rails put back on, the throttle body back on, and alternator, all that stuff, and it'll still be super easy to put the replacement coil in. And then we'll be getting into the supercharger specific stuff. Alright, finding more problems with this intake. See that gap? That's for the alternator bracket. So it's bolting on here and it's being held up in the back, and it does look like these two bosses on this intake manifold are shorter than they were on the factory plastic one. This intake manifold came with a new bracket. However, it is not even remotely close to lining up with the holes. Like, it's so much shorter. So that's kind of a junk piece. But I don't know, I can bolt it down and it'll bend and flex to where it is, but I feel like I should at least stick some washers underneath that to just make sure that we're not putting a bunch of stress into the alternator by cranking this down and then having like a Boeing force pulling the top back on it. Yet another bolt issue with this intake. So these throttle body or flange bolts, the two above the runners, so this one and the one kitty quarter from it, aren't threaded deep enough because the hole isn't drilled all the way through into the port. Which, okay, I understand that, but they provided bolts that had maybe 4 or 5 threads at the most to hold that on. I had these and of course they didn't send any washers with them either. I had these flange head ones, which saves me needing the washer, which I much prefer, and they were a little bit too long for this. I had to cut like 3 threads off of them on just the 2, and then the other 2 have plenty of thread in the manifold. But once again, the hardware just kind of sucks. So where I'm at right now, I'm trying not to unhook the AC system. However, this would be a lot easier if I could. But this is because I had to swap that pulley for the crank. And I just ran out of space to be able to put an impact gun on it to make the puller work, because otherwise it was just spinning the engine. But now I've got this swapped out. So I really could stick the whole radiator in back and still continue doing this swap, but I'm at this point, it'd be a lot easier to just pop the AC lines and pull this radiator out of the way, just to have tons of access in here for doing the bracket. But in order to get this radiator out, if you got to do the same thing, you got to pull the battery box. There's, a bunch of stuff in the way, several screws around here. There's even one up here on the side of the fender. But once that stuff's out, then you can get to these big mounts. I tried pulling one of these up where these flip up, but obviously on this side with the AC, you can't flip it up far enough to really get that out. So that's why I had to pull the battery box in order to get the radiator loose far enough to give me that space. Swapped out the small pulley for the larger one to make sure we can keep our power level down so we're not blowing rods out the bottom on this thing. This was fairly easy to swap out. It's just kind of a sticky slip fit. And I'm sure it's just sticky from a little bit of oil residue. It's a used blower. So, yeah, I got that swapped out. This pulley bracket goes on with this smooth pulley with the flanges. We got to make sure that this is lined up. Pretty sure this spacer goes here. So it's going to be these three holes that mount it to the engine. Which I believe are going to be this one, and this one up here. This one being the smaller one that's near the other pulley. I've loosened this one up because this needs to come off. A different pulley needs to go on this location down here. I think this gets relocated. This is what it said. I'm trying to go off of directions that are for a Mustang, and they've got different years because there's not really good straight up directions for this. Well, that's a shitty bearing in this idler anyway. So yeah, we gotta put an idler down here, and then yeah, maybe this is the idler that's on our kit. I don't know. I gotta look at it again. But, of course, I didn't get a bolt for relocating the idler down here. I think this one's, yeah, it's the same size down there. I'll have to, full of junk in there. I'll have to run a tap through there, clean it out the threads. But, so yeah, I'm going to have to look for a bolt, probably a washer or something, because it's not in the kit. So we'll figure that out. I just pulled those bolts and studs out, and I just want to make a note that on this car, there's a ground wire right here on this particular stud. Pretty sure we're not going to be able to have that in there. We got to run a different bolt in here anyway for that supercharger bracket, so probably going to have to find somewhere to run this ground to afterwards. Okay, I was right about these two bolts getting used down here. This one's going to be a pulley. This one is also going to use, so I chased that thread. This is not the correct one. It's going to be sharing the alternator bolt over here. And that'll get a big spacer on it to work out that. I don't know what application this supercharger was used in before, but it looks like I got to relocate the drain because it's off to the side at an angle. It needs to be facing down, and we don't have the right fitting for the supply. So based on pictures I'm looking at, this should be like straight up and down. So this will be the alternator bolt over here. You can see this drain is there. We should move it to here because it's got a little clamp that's meant to help hold the hose coming off the bottom. So I mean, there's plenty of options there. And then that's supposed to be our supply, but I don't know what thread it is because the kit intended this 1/8 MPT to go in there. It doesn't clear this boss for beginners, and it looks like a fairly coarse thread in there, so that's going to be some kind of special fitting. We'll have to figure out what that is. So here are the pulleys. So this is the one that comes with the supercharger kit that gets added in. This is the stock one that would otherwise be I don't know, depending on the kit size, this is what I was provided by the customer. However, in the kit instructions of the one I'm seeing, which are for a Mustang, are saying that this should have a guide on both sides. And it also looks like it's a smaller diameter if it's the same as the one that's on the supercharger bracket. But I also didn't have a bolt. No, a second factory bolt because it wasn't getting used, so I made a spacer and a regular bolt in here so that it's just located on there to keep it centered and lock that bearing down. This would be that other style pulley, but we've only got one, so this one is definitely one that's called for up on the supercharger itself. So I guess we'll just see if we've got any problems when it starts running. If we toss a belt and shred it, we might have to change that pulley out. I've also got the supercharger with the bracket loosened back up because we need to add our oil feed line in there. However, I realized after looking around and seeing that what was supplied with the oil feed line wasn't going to actually work in here. There's actually the, I don't know what we want to call it, the adapter or orifice that goes in that meters the oil needs to be threaded into here because that's a 3/8 16 thread, and it's supposed to get this 45 with an 1/8 MPT mounted in here, something like that, so that everything clears this bracket when it's down. I think this bracket might end up needing a little clearancing anyway later, but this is supposed to be in there like that. And I wasn't provided that, so we're gonna have to get some parts ordered. This is a V1. Between this oil supply issue and the fact that this needs to be just a hole punched in the pan for the drain, I'm not liking this setup. A sealed unit V3 would probably be a much better option, but this is what we've got to work with. Now this drain is actually meant to go on just like this, which seems like a precarious place to put it as well, but there is a flat portion right at the front of the pan. I really can't see it well. There you can see a little better. So there's that flat portion in front of the pan, and Vortec's instructions are just smash a hole into it and stretch the hole out to 9/16 so that you can run a 3/8 pipe tap in it and catch this fitting. I'm not real thrilled about doing that, but it's like a big job to pull the oil pan on these things apparently, so it's just kind of where we're at. I wish there was a better place. It'd be nice if we could just have a little, a spot like into the side of the timing cover or something like that, but I'm guessing they put a little more engineering thought into it. And if that's the best solution that they came up with for installing this kit, that's probably just kind of what we're stuck with, unless we're going to pull the pan. And I don't know if we want to add several more hours to this install, or already running into issues here and there with parts and bolts and making things fit, so I think we just do it the way they intend to do it and smash a hole in the pan. I'm going to say right off the bat that with the instructions that I'm going by, don't say anything about removing the radiator. And as far as I'm concerned right now, you need to do this, especially for this oil drain back deal at the front of the pan, because otherwise, I mean, the radiator be right here. Like, technically there's space in there, but I don't know how the heck they expect you to get a punch and a hammer up in there to swing it and actually make the hole, much less be able to see how it's going and do anything without it being way harder than it should be. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. Just pull the radiator and coolers and stuff out. Also, as long as we were here, I pulled the old transmission and power steering cooler, since this car is no longer an automatic and it has electric steering now, so neither one of those coolers is being used. So I eliminated that from between the condenser and the radiator, and it should free up a little bit of airflow through both. There you can see I've got a center punch where the directions said to put it, which was about 5/8 down and 1 7/8 over from this bolt. I've got two different punches here. Got one pointy one to get going, and then this one is actually the hex, like across the points, is 9/16, so that should get us close enough. I'm just gonna hammer into this, I guess, because that's what it says to do. And I don't necessarily like that, but here we are. The worst that happens is I completely screw it up, and then we got to pull the pan anyway, and then it'll do it right. Oh. Ah! Ouch. All right, there he popped it through. Make sure I'm not hitting anything there. That's my bigger concern, is damaging something inside. Which I know I'm not going to be able to get this camera so you guys can see, but it looks like it's quite a ways in there till something hits. Let's check the depth though. Oh, there, that's how much space we've got till something hits. It's actually quite a bit. Basically up to the hex on that punch. So I've got a ways I can go yet. Alright, it's probably a good place to stop. Now, why this method works is because you can see it's rounding that edge over, and it's moving the material from being flat to being parallel to the hole, which then gives it a little bit of material to put some threads in. Or at least that's the idea. Should double check that depth again on this other one. And I'm not going to be able to make it all the way to my hex on this punch, so there, I heard it tap something in there. Put a little nick in something. It looks like plastic, whatever it was. Alright, so we're maybe about a ½ inch. We still need to go a little bit bigger. We'll have to see what I've got there that I can make for a punch to get the right size. Okay, I whipped this up on the lathe. It's machined to 9/16, so when it goes in, it'll be the correct size, and then I just got a lead taper that's hopefully enough to get this going. There, we're in. Oof. Yeah, I don't know about this method, but I guess we try to tap it. Now the directions that I have say tap it 1/4 inch deep, which is only like 3 threads. Pack it full of grease. Here. Taps packed full of grease. And just come in here and try to get this going. Now I'm sure the super shallow tapping is to make sure that we're not cutting through the material altogether and breaking it off inside the pan. Because we want that material to be there to hold our fitting. One, two, three and a half threads. So now, hopefully there's just enough thread there to catch our fitting. And as we screw the fitting in tight, it keeps expanding that metal a little bit to pinch on the fitting. Or at least I think that's the theory behind it. I can't imagine trying to do this without this radiator out. It'd be just a nightmare. Alright, well, hopefully it's just a little bit of grease inside. The grease on our tap did catch quite a bit of material. Like I said, we're barely cutting on there, so let's test fit our fitting. We just need this sucker to catch, I think. And of course it's going to be a big pain in the butt to get started. No, we're not far enough to get our fitting to start. So we'll try tapping it a little farther. All right, well, it's starting to peel a little bit of brass off of that fitting. On the one side, it's certainly to the point where it'll be tight. And this is the part where the directions say go ahead and pack a bunch of silicone around that. So, I mean, it's literally got one thread catching. Ooh, yeah, it's rubbing that off. I really don't want to go too far with the tap, just because whatever the thickness of that oil pan is only the material we have to catch threads. So I guess I'd rather run the risk of the fitting just not having enough thread where it just has to seal, versus cutting the threads deep enough where they actually straight up cut that whole section off, and then we won't have anything to tighten against. So, again, this is why I don't like this idea, but it's supposed to save time and be just fine. Seems like it'll get the job done. The blue fitting was added just below the oil pressure sensor that you can see just above it. That is going to be our oil feed port. The kit also comes with this T setup where if your specific engine doesn't have that extra port on the bottom, then you put the sensor right here and then you can tie it in. Well, actually I think they say put the sensor on the bottom, that way you're facing forward with this fitting. But I don't know, the diagram I was looking at also has those other ones oriented down like this, so then you'd put it in so the feed line faces forward. Now what I didn't see specified about the feed line was whether or not it was top or bottom, because there's one port up here and there's one 180 opposite it that's probably think it's right here. Nope. Other side. There's the top one right there. So the other one's right in here. But anyway, it didn't say which one it needed to be. I assumed the top one, however the line's not long enough for that, so it's got to be the bottom one. There's a fitting that goes in there that I don't have that also is like a restricting orifice, and either side it's spraying directly at the contact between the gears, so it really shouldn't matter whether it's top or bottom. I thought maybe this thing was meant to have a bit of an oil reservoir in it before draining back, but it looks like it's just a spray splash oiling and then it drains immediately. Now I just loosely have it bolted down just to see where it was. I was also wondering whether or not you'd even be able to get a belt in there. Does not look like it. Looks like the belt's going to have to go on like sort of close first and then finish snaking the stuff around, because you got super tight clearances like here up to over the alternator. There's also that pulley down here that's almost completely hidden that I have no idea how you'd ever snake a belt in there before you could get everything going. But then also we got a little bit of yeah, I don't know if I can get it to focus. There's yeah, if you can see that little spot below that bolt mount where it's contacting the casting on the timing cover's got to be clearanced right there. So I did see a note to that in the instructions that I'm following. However, it said that it would only be in some cases, not always, but I wasn't sure what they were talking about, but now I know. So this is why I also didn't just crank the thing down and just lightly bolted it up to C, and you can see that it's holding that other one up off of the timing cover yet, so that has to be clearanced first. Just cut a little material back on that boss so that we should have enough clearance for our bracket. It's gonna put the serpentine belt in, but it's all twisty, so I'm gonna just let it hang here for a little while and stretch out, hopefully so that it quits rolling, because I'm pretty sure we need to get it at least kind of in place before setting the supercharger on, just because there's no room. So it's gonna be kind of a pain in the butt, but it'll be a lot easier if that thing quits trying to roll and twist and do all weird things. Even after hanging that belt for a while, I still had to fight with it to get it on here. This crank pulley and the water pump are so tight together, you gotta like get it started and then turn the crank to pop the belt all the way through. But otherwise, I think I got it in here the right way. We're gonna have enough slack up here to make sure that we can get that supercharger in there. So I'm gonna try to set it in there again. Pull around that one. Go down underneath. Oh great, yeah. How the heck am I gonna make this happen without do I pull it off? Pull it off the water pump. Is that really that tight? Oh man, really? Well, I think the problem is I got two pulleys riding on each other. Yeah, the belt is touching. So this pulley and this pulley had the belt rubbing together. So one of them is too big. Well, yeah, so no, this one's the ribbed one. That one's, so this pulley is probably too big. or I've missed something. Well, it's looking like that's the wrong pulley size. Like, it's the right location, except it's supposed to be, the way the instructions go, is the original one here relocated, and it's supposed to be a smooth one, but what was on here was a ribbed pulley to begin with, so I can't reuse that one. The bearing was bad in it anyway. But otherwise, the smooth pulley that was provided was a 3.5-inch diameter, and we probably need a 3-inch diameter one. So I'm gonna have to pick that up and then get that swapped out, and then that should make enough clearance for our belt because it's very tight right here. And when I went to put the bolt in that passes and uses the alternator location, the spacer here that goes off of this was actually touching that pulley too, so the bolt couldn't even line up to go in. So yeah, definitely just the wrong parts that were provided. Alright, so finally have the right parts. Got their smaller pulley, got this injection fitting here, and our oil feed with the 45. Now that makes sense. If you don't have that, it's got a 3/8/16 thread, and it's actually like the metering needle, you could call it. Like, it's basically just the oil restriction, and then it sticks into the supercharger to spray directly on the mating surfaces of the gears. So this thing doesn't actually be flooded with oil, it just tries to have as little in there as possible while keeping everything fully lubricated. So, which makes sense, it'd be less friction that way. I gotta say, this kit is quite tedious for setup and getting everything in place. Not cranking any of these down yet, just wanting to look and see, make sure we got clearance. Back on that boss we had to add room to. Try to make sure the belt's sitting in all of the grooves right. I hope that clears. Alright, let that run the tensioner. Oh, and of course, we can't even get our frickin' wrench on the tensioner. That's awesome. Oh man, this bracket should have been designed better. That's, oh, it's right behind it. Dumb. Just dumb. God damn. Why would they not think about that in the design? Well, I didn't get very far because the belt's too short. But we had a smaller pulley, so I swapped that out with the power steering delete pulley. And with this one, I can get the belt on. And there's right at the end of the travel on the tensioner. So that's not going to work either. We're trying to find a larger pulley. This is a 3-inch pulley. This one's a 5-inch pulley. I think there's a 3.5 available and sounds like a 4.2. Doing the math, I think the 3.5 will work. Worst case scenario, I can make spacers to move this block out, which will add to the length of belt being needed. I did try it with a 3/8 spacer just to check, and at least we're into the tensioner at that point, although it'd be nice to be a little bit more. The 3.5-inch pulley, doing the math for like a half wrap, which it's not quite. Math says that that's a little bit more than what the 3/8 spacer will do, so it'll be in the ballpark anyway. I think we're going to go that route just so we don't have to make spacers or end up with a belt length that's not standardized for these kits, I guess. Yeah, so the next thing is hooking up the oil drain. Of course, with the electric rack on the bottom, there's absolutely no space to get in there, so I had to cut down a wrench. Of course, it's tight to the oil pan on the top side because of the location. So now I'm into it for a specialty tool. It's just, yeah, it's been kind of a lot of stuff here, but since we can solve this with a pulley, I don't have to pull the charger off, which means I can hook up the drain line. I can hook up the supply line. I've had to swap out the oil pressure fitting and add in a T because we want to measure our temperature too, so that's added in. Just trying to make progress where I can right now. Yesterday was a bunch of time spent getting the boost pipes laid out and set up. This was not a super simple task. Also, you buy the cheap stuff, it welds like crap. But I had to reclock the supercharger, which was real difficult to get in here. Everything's so tight. This AC canister actually had to get lowered, which you can see the difference in the holes down there. So that's that old hole just above where it's mounted at now. It's got a little like arm off the bottom that's got a spacer. So it's got that arm off the bottom with the spacer now in order to make that work out. Hey, Oscar. Found two different pulleys that we're going to try as far as making the belt work out. Also test fit the fan setup. It gets really close in here, but it does fit. This coolant line, also super tight. We're going to have to extend that and then move to go to the fender mount coolant tank. Currently looking at what I got to do with the vacuum for the blow-off valve. There's a fitting right back here where this hose was hooked up. I got to pull this throttle body, and then I think I can put like a manifold off of there so I can still run the hose and run one for the blow-off valve. Will be the simplest way to do it. And then this recirc is going to need to get plugged. Well, the next issue that we're working through here is the coolant tank. Obviously, we can't run the stock one because its place was right where the supercharger now sits. So John got this fender mount style for the older Crown Vics, which is supposed to go over here. However, it won't work with the later inner fender because the later inner fender is all smooth there. So there's no places for the mounting points. And even if I added some or tried to punch through that one, I'd have to chop it out pretty big because it's up high enough where it hits the hood when the hood closes, and the hood would just be riding on the coolant tank. So that's not going to be a good solution either. I did find a slightly different one where there's space for it to go and look kind of OEM-ish over here on the driver's side. However, we're ending up with coolant lines that got to go across the entire engine bay at that point in time, and I'd have to build a crazy bracket over here to mount it as well. But at least we've got, you know, 2 mount points that used to be for the airbox over here. I'm not really loving either one of these. No. Instead, I'd like to go to more of an aftermarket style, like just like canister tank, because once we've got the radiator hose on here, we got nice room space on the driver's side of the radiator cooling fan, where we can put it near the cooling fan but mount it off of the frame so it's solid mounted, and the upper radiator hose will kind of snake around the cap and it'll fit really nice. Then we're only running our small hose across the top of the radiator to hook it into the tank, and our large hose that comes off of the lower radiator hose currently is coming up right next to the supercharger here. So again, we can just extend that and go over the top of the fan, or we can go down to the bottom, cut that hose, put a 90 on it, and then just run it underneath and then up into the bottom of a canister style expansion tank, which would be the preferred method, just to keep more hoses and stuff down underneath the engine and not be doing even more clutter to the top side. Finally got the belt detention up. You can see we've got a little bit of tensioner working there, and that's with the 3 3/4 idler pulley. There's also a 4-inch pulley that we can go to if we need just a little bit more. I'm depending on how much the belt stretches. You know, a new belt, it's going to stretch some. I don't know how much. That might be totally fine. We'll just keep the other pulley on hand just in case we run into belt slip or something like that, where maybe we want to add a little more tension. Then we can pull back to the bigger pulley. The intercooler and oil cooler are final mounted now. We had to get a different oil cooler, but it fits really nice up here versus the other one that was more square, was just being real difficult to put anywhere with it fitting. I cut out this crash bar bottoms to make sure there's more airflow to be able to get up towards the top of the intercooler. We're still going to have to try to maybe build some kind of a scoop off the bottom, or at least box in the air that's coming through the lower part of the bumper, so that will pressurize in front of the intercooler and make sure that we're actually getting proper cooling there. Otherwise, it has been discussed whether or not we're taking away some of this plastic and then putting openings in the top area of the bumper itself. For the oil cooler, I just added a cross piece to the brackets for the intercooler. I was able to bolt it down real nice there, and then a bracket back to the horn mount, and one over to that bolt hole off the front. And now everything's nice and solid. Also, that's not only supporting just the oil cooler, but because it's all like an assembly now, it's supporting the intercooler also. Now that we've got the belt and everything on, the fan is back in, and I'm trying to decide where the cooling tank's gonna go. Now, the plan has been right here. There's tons of room. It's just kind of far away from anywhere to mount, whether it's the studs off the timing cover there or going down to the frame and making a mount. And the hoses are over here, so it would be kind of nice if it would fit right in here. It's really tight, but if we can make it work, I think that's going to be the better option that I'm going to want to go with. This is the tank here. It's a unit from Speedway. It's just an expansion tank. We had to remove the fitting off the bottom because it's set up for 8AN. we're going to be going to the 1-inch just so it matches up with that factory hose, and then this adapter down to this 3/8 matches the factory hose too. So the idea would be, I mean, if we could mount it right there and it's got hood clearance, that would be awesome, because it'd be a super short hose right here, and you can see that hose is right there. It should be able to just cut it a little bit shorter and hook it up, easy peasy. But I don't know if we're gonna have enough room, and the bracket on that side is gonna be just as difficult, which is why I'm considering it. Otherwise, here's the plan. There's tons of room in every direction. It'll look pretty factory in that location anyway with the hose wrapping around it. So that's the backup plan. Here's my radiator tank solution. We don't have a lot of clearance. Fan shroud will be right in here as well. But we were able to make a short little hose. There was just enough room to make this happen. And we were able to hook up to the factory hose after cutting about 1.25 inches off of it. You can see I've had to weld a new fitting on at an angle down there. And our bracket that supports it all the way up, I mean, it's pretty rigid. There's a little bit of a tab off the back, you probably can't see it down in there, that like hooks into the top of the frame rail where there's an opening. And the bolt down there on the bottom is actually the original bolt for the AC canister thing there, where you can see I re-drilled it lower down. So we're reusing that factory location, although of course it, like this entire project, did not go easy or to plan, because I put it in there to mock it up the first time, and then the second time when I tried to bolt it down, it stripped all the threads out of the frame. So now there's a nut welded in there in order to make sure that this is mounted, but it's nice to see that it's rigid. Another modification we're doing is we're going to the higher pressure radiator cap. That just helps with cooling efficiency. We're still working on a filter setup that clears the radiator shroud without having to cut it. I really don't want to cut it because, number one, the shroud is designed to maximize airflow. Two, if we cut it, that's hot air coming in right away, and or rather a leak in behind the fan that's not pulling air through the radiator and instead pulling it away from the supercharger. Just cutting that fan shroud is not a good option. Well, we've got yet again more problems going on. I started filling up the coolant, and I can hear a massive air leak coming from the intake manifold somewhere with the coolant. So obviously we've got a pretty big leak there somewhere, and we're just gonna have to take the manifold back off and look. I'm a little suspect that the manifold wasn't machined flat to begin with, just being an imported cheap manifold. But apparently that's a super common area for all of the intakes to leak. Maybe it's something we can just put some silicone around. If it's warped bad enough, I'm going to ditch the gaskets completely. But I really can't tell exactly where it's coming from right now. So before I get the coolant filled up all the way where I got to drain some again, I'm just going to start pulling it apart, so that we don't have just coolant everywhere, and we got to take a look at where the leak potentially is. Check the manifold for straight and flat. Maybe it's got to get remachined. Maybe we just silicone it and it'll be fine. This appears to be the culprit. That little bit shinier spot in the middle that goes around and then it falls right off of this edge. Yeah, that's this single contact point on the gasket. going right off, so it would have been leaking the air right out the side there. Oh, that's not great. So just casting issues kind of a thing, although I mean really with where everything, I mean you can see even, you know, on the ports that it's all shifted that way. I mean how much space there is there. It's just what you get with low quality castings. Alright, I finally solved the manifold leak issue because of that misalignment of the port. What I had to do was get the right stuff, RTV, you know, your 1 minute gasket stuff, because my other 24-hour cure time stuff and the epoxy that we tried to put in the manifold just didn't cure for whatever reason. I don't know if the epoxy was just maybe too thick, and the RTV, I don't understand why it didn't work, but basically as soon as I started adding fluid again, I could still hear the same big hiss. And after taking it back apart and looking at it, it looked like what was happening was, even though I had RTV on it, when that gasket would push on the uneven surface, it just like slide over and then smear a big opening into it. So the solution was take that gasket out, and then I used a pick to peel the actual rubber sealant out of the gasket. So like the blue rubber part that actually would be the gasket, I had to pick that out and then just RTV the whole thing in that area. So like the ports are still normal gasket, and then I just got RTV around the water ports. But then on the one specifically by the water neck, there's no gasket material there at all. It's just the hard plastic shell still, and it's all RTV to make a gasket in that groove, and where it doesn't perfectly line up, then it can just settle in and make it work versus being deflected while being torqued down. All that to say, this is where cheap manifolds are cheap manifolds, and they tend to cause more problems than they solve being cheap, because if this would have just fit right the first time, we wouldn't have had any of these issues. I wouldn't have had to take this thing apart 4 times. It's just, you know, you get what you pay for, and it sucks when it ends up being this, because now I've got a ton of time in it where, as John brought up there, if he knew I was good at aluminum welding before, he said he'd have bought a different intake and had us cut the top off and spin the inlet around from the Mustang side to the Crown Vic side to be able to feed from the driver's side. And that's certainly something that could have been performed on a different intake manifold. So, you know, not that it would have been any real price difference at that point, but hopefully it would have been a better intake manifold altogether when it was said and done. But I've now fired it up a little bit just to check. We got no leaks, which is good. The fuel pump sounded pretty weird right off the bat. There was a little bit of a goofiness to start, and it was just like it needed to prime, and it was making kind of an odd sound. But I mean, it primed up there. We fired it. I mean, it runs. It's got a huge freaking blower surge going onto it right now, which is, you know, the big fuel injectors that it's not tuned for that right now. But at least I started it, was able to build oil pressure, check for leaks. Total system ended up being 7 quarts. It's just a hair below the full mark. So that worked out really well. I was just guessing and I put 7 in, so kind of nailed it there. Really, we're just waiting on a filter setup that we can make work here. I'm also seeing that my belt's a tooth off on the supercharger here. I'll have to get that straightened out just after everything's cycled through and just where it happened to land. So yeah, I'll just loosen the tensioner up a little bit, get that popped over, and we'll be good to go there. Coolant is back where it's at. It won't be quite topped off yet until we can actually run it, put some heat in it, but I mean basically all the coolant that came out of it went back in it. Should be pretty close there anyway. It's just a matter of getting the warmed up so the thermostat opens to make sure we're getting fluid everywhere. Alright, I didn't film pulling the full pump out because it's up under the car, but I was able to do it with just jacking up the back and letting the rear suspension droop down for some more room and then pull the cover. However, it did take some serious gymnastics because the wires are stuck in there. In this car, it's rusted enough that I can't drop the tank to get any more space from the wires. So I had to like do a whole thing to get it out. There's no way I could have had a camera set up under there and still manage to do it while seeing what I was doing. Now this appears to be a drop-in other than the plugs are different. The AEM pump came with its own plug, so I'll have to see what I got to do for wiring that up, but other than that it should be able to sit right back in place of the original. Alright, finally found an air filter that fits. As John put it, it is the smallest K&N that they sell that has a 3.5 inch opening, and looks like we got about a 1/4 inch clearance, so that worked out pretty dang well. So we'll come back to this in a couple of days when we're ready to flash a tune on it and start doing some street tuning. Alright, I realize that this is kind of an awkward place to end this video, but John came up to get the car and started doing some tuning and stuff on it yesterday, and we kind of just ran into problem after problem after problem. And first thing right off the bat was the blow-off valve was messing with the mass airflow sensor, which in hindsight made sense because we put it after the mass airflow and before the throttle body. And it should have, I should have thought about that a little bit harder to know that that was probably not the place, because then you're releasing air after it was metered and then it's throwing off the air fuel to the engine. However, when he was back and forth with whoever he was talking to for help on that, at least at the time, we were both under the understanding we got told to put it there. So we just had to pull it off, cut the flange off, put a cap over it. We ended up moving it to where the blower was aimed down to go towards the intercooler. We had a straight pipe coming down, and then right at the bottom of the radiator and fan setup, there was just enough room to tuck it on the 90 degree up as high as we could. I didn't want to put it down at the bottom of the car, especially on the side, because it would have got blasted by anything coming off of the tire. So it's actually kind of up behind the fan shroud in a protected area, which I felt good about that because I really was not super excited about putting it down that low in the car, but we got it into a good spot. Welded the adapter back on for that and fit it, and then we just had to extend the vacuum line back up to where we had it hooked into anyway. After we got done with that, we were able to get the tuners back on the phone kind of a thing and start messing with it, and went out to do a pull and found out the O2 sensor was either dead or dying or on its way out. I mean, it looked fine as far as what we could read on the gauge, but at wide open throttle it was just stuck at a certain number. And them guys were saying it should have been 12.5, and instead it was saying 14.5. So then we had to pull that, run to the parts store, find an O2 sensor. He also had his SCT scan tool. There's what they call a firewire. That wasn't wired into the AEM air fuel ratio gauge either, so I wired that in while he was gone getting the O2 sensor. I don't know if I had it wired in right. There wasn't any clear directions on there. Mostly it was just positive analog, negative analog to hook it up. Hopefully it'll work when the time comes. Otherwise, I mean, we can readdress that if we get some more information on it, kind of a thing. So it was just a matter of making that work. And by that time we were so late in the day, you know, people were going home, kind of a thing. So really didn't get a chance to run it I believe about a week from now, he's still planning on autocrossing the car. Should be able to get it tuned next Friday, kind of a thing. So you'll have to jump over to John's channel to see some of that and how that stuff goes to really kind of finish out this, supercharger install build kind of a thing. But I did want to come back and clarify on that blow-off valve position. That it needs to be before the mass airflow sensor, and what the tuner told us was it needs to be as close to the supercharger and as far away from the mass airflow sensor as possible. And so that's why I compromised with the place we put it. And the situation with the belt jumping the pulley one tooth on the supercharger. Turns out that guided, the non-ribbed but guided pulley that's on the leading side, so the side of the belt that's going towards the supercharger, was an 8 rib and should have been a 6 rib, so it was allowing it to just walk enough to just jump one tooth on the supercharger. For right now, we left it so that John could take the car home and make sure that he can have time available to do the tune next Friday. I'm not worried about that shredding belt or anything because the supercharger pulley had just standard rib height the whole way. It didn't have guides on it. If it did have guides on it, that might have solved the problem, or it would have created a problem where we're going to shred the belt. But so that's something else to look in. I can't tell you what the part numbers were for those pulleys because it was just stuff in a box when it got here. But it was, I know it's a 3-inch pulley and it needs to be non-ribbed and guided. And that was the one before the supercharger. The one after the supercharger's just a 3-inch smooth. And the problem we had with that earlier in the video was that there was a 3.5 that we originally had. So really, and that was just complications between the Crown Vic setup and the Mustang setup that the whole system was designed around. John and I are planning on using YouTube's collaboration thing. As far as I've never dealt with there, he seems to think that if we check the boxes on that, like basically if you're watching my video, you'll be able to see his videos pop up kind of a thing, and vice versa. So hopefully that works. You'll be able to jump over to his channel and see his video on finally getting this thing tuned and autocrossing it for the first time and how that goes.